very pleased to welcome the Commissioner here. And as I mentioned before, he's also one of our Be Active ambassadors. And he's just here today to talk to us about his perspective on the importance of physical activity at both the individual and community level. Commissioner was appointed as the top police officer in Western Australia in 2004. He's responsible for more than 5,800 police officers, over 1,800 police staff, and an operating budget of more than $1.2 billion a year. Commissioner Callahan has introduced a Back to Basics reform program in the Western Australian Police called Frontline First. His goals have been to get more police officers in the front line to carry out fundamental policing work that is expected by the community. Commissioner Callahan has a diverse policing background. He includes the management of operational police districts in both metropolitan and country areas. He's also been responsible for legislative reform, major business re-engineering and the management of major corporate projects and reform in the WA Police. Commissioner Callahan's qualifications include a PhD, Bachelor of Education, First Class Honours, Bachelor of Arts in Education, and in 1997 was awarded a Churchill Fellowship. He's married with 4 children, and some of you may be aware of this, but has a passion for rock and roll music and plays guitar and is lead singer in his own band, The Filth. I've heard them, they're very, very good. In 2011 he established Bright Blue, the Police Commissioner's Fund for Sick Kids, a not-for-profit charity that raises money to purchase specialised medical equipment to sick children through WA and beyond. So we're really grateful to have the Commissioner here, so without further ado...
Okay, thank you very much for having me here today. I have a bit of a confession to make while I talk to people about activity and sport and those sorts of things, that I've never in my entire life won a trophy or a medal for sport anywhere, not at school, not since school, not in policing. I'm always at the back of the pack as far as anything to do with sport is concerned. But being useless at sport like I am doesn't mean to say you can't get involved in physical activity, of course. And physical activity is an integrated part of my life. Sport is not and never has been. So they're not mutually exclusive concepts. You heard mentioned in the opening of my CV that I enjoy playing in a rock band, which is true. Less often mentioned is that I also enjoy what might be called rock music history. So I do a bit of reading around that, and over the years I've sort of developed quite an interest in it. And whether you realise it or not, in the rock music genre, there's a lot being said over the years about physical activity, and a lot of songs being written about it or have been written about it in the past. So if you're a child of the 60s, and as I cast my eye around here, there's a few people who were around in the 60s and can remember them, you'll remember the Spencer Davis Group's Keep On Running, which was a big hit at the time. Or the Beatles' 1969 classic was about gymnasium work, which says, boy, you've got to carry that weight. You'll find that on the Abbey Road album. And if you can't remember Rufus Thomas's 1963 hit, Walking the Dog, you must surely remember Johnny Cash's hit, Walk the Line. So there's a lot of things going on in the 60s. In the 70s, so if you're a child of the 70s, you might remember ABBA encouraging us to dance in Dancing Queen. And if you're a woman, perhaps, and you're interested in keeping your cardio up, Gimme, 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 A Man After Midnight. Sherbet encouraged us to play cricket. You messed about, I caught you out, how's that? The Eagles, however, cautioned us a little bit about over-exuberance and over-exercise in the song Take It Easy, which had the lyrics, I've been running down the road trying to loosen my load, I've got 7 women on my mind, which is probably a little bit over the top. If you're a child of the 80s, so we're getting much closer to the average age in this room now, I think, you will remember Olivia Newton-John's provocative video, Let's Get Physical, or Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel's cardio-enhancing song, Running Up That Hill. Remember those from the 80s as well. And if there's anyone left in the room at all who's ever listened to Cliff Richard, he introduced us to physical activity with a Walkman in the 1980s with his song Wired for Sound, where they were travelling on skateboards, and for the first time ever they were actually wired listening to music while they were involved in physical activity. That only became possible in the 1980s really. And if you are a child of the 90s, then you're young enough not to need any motivation, because you can at the most only be 22, and I shouldn't be having to lecture you about being sedentary, so shame on you if you're not active. I want to approach the issue of physical activity on several levels this morning. One, on a personal level, as Karl O'Callaghan, not so much Commissioner of Police, but it's a bit interlocked these days. Secondly, what it means to the West Australia Police. And thirdly, you heard mentioned in the introduction the impact that physical activity has on communities, or vice versa. Communities have on physical activity and the safe being and well-being of those communities. And let me start with a premise. At the individual level, regular, constant physical activity will not be sustained unless it meets the three following criteria. One, it must be varied. Two, it must be integrated with your life, and we've heard that mentioned this morning. And three, it must be fun. If it doesn't integrate and you've got to find lots of special time to do it, then it can be quite difficult to achieve in a busy world. So if you sort of sit down and try listing all of the physical activity things you do in a week, walking the dog, kicking footy with the kids, working in the garden, you're allowed to put sex down if you want as well, and you total all of these up, you will see that you actually are probably quite physical in the way you go about your world. And at the end of the day, the reason we do a lot of those things is because it makes us feel good. But physical activity is not always about making us feel good, and you can imagine what it's like being the Commissioner of Police. So some days it can be enormously stressful and demanding. You've got the public gaze on you all the time, you're responding to the media all the time. And my motivation to engage in physical activity isn't just about feeling good, but I do it for my heart. I do it for mental sharpness, because I find on the most stressful days, if you get time to do something really physical, it does sharpen your mind and it keeps your mind sharp, so that's important. And the other thing is I do it as a role model for the rest of the police, because if you see the person at the top of the organisation doing that sort of stuff, then everybody else will want to do it as well. And so, as I said, because we all have busy lifestyles, we have to be able to make that integrated in some way. So while you need to find time to do some things which are not integrated, you can do a lot of things as integrated activity. And I've sat down and thought of lots of ways to integrate physical activity with the way I go about my business. So let me give you some examples. Until three years ago, I never owned a dog in my life, never had anything to do with dogs, never really wanted one. But I now own a retired greyhound. She wants to be walked between 30 and 60 minutes a day, and I do that after dinner, I do that at night. I don't watch TV, don't have much interest in it anyway, particularly the news. And so when the news is on, that's the 6 o'clock news and the 7 o'clock news on ABC, I walk the dog. And I actually make calls during that time, so phone calls, I do some business while I'm walking. And if I'm not doing business, I listen to audiobooks. So that's what I call an integrated activity. A couple of times a week I complete what's called a purposive run. Now, a purposive run is not a run that returns to base. Most people go for a run, they run a circuit. You run around the river, you run around the block, you run around your streets, you run around the park. This is where I've struck a deal with one of my colleagues to drop me off halfway to home. Now I work in Perth and live in Guildford, total kilometres about 15. So what I do is I get my colleague to drop me off at Garrett Road Bridge, and I run the last 8 kilometres. No support, no going back. She doesn't wait around, she just goes home, and I've got to get home. And if I can't run it, I've got to walk it, but that's the only way home. And if I do that twice a week, it's part of my daily travel home. I'm not actually impinging on work time, or I'm not impinging on home time either. Find the same thing riding bicycles sometimes. I can ride a bicycle to and from Guildford to the city and back again. It takes about 35 minutes. But it actually takes me nearly 35 minutes to get home at night if I'm driving a car as well, because I'm stationary in traffic a lot of the time. So that's what I call integrated work as well. It's part of your daily lifestyle. And I guess that for me, it's really important to do all of these things as a de-stressor. And I guess these are the sorts of things that, if you don't, if the going gets tough and you don't pay attention to these things as part of your life, it's very easy to fall off the wagon and not get back on as far as physical activity goes. So I'm very well aware of the need to keep this up. I'm also well aware of my own circadian rhythm or body clock, and I know that if I don't do physical activity all the time or constantly, that I don't feel tired enough to sleep properly, and so you get broken sleep, and so the cumulative effect on the body can be quite negative if you can't get all those things in sync. On an organisational level, if we go up to the police themselves, it would be nice to think that you could get all police officers involved in physical activity and meeting certain grades and certain criteria for fitness. When they go through the academy, they get all of this training, and they leave the academy after 6 months of training, and on that day they are the fittest they will ever be. They'll never be that fit again because they will never manage in their own personal life to be able to manage to keep that up. So we have what's called a Fit for Life program, which is a program of encouragement rather than compulsion, which is not just about physical activity but is about wellness, diet, de-stressing, counselling, sharing problems and physical activity and all of those sorts of things. And we've been able to integrate a lot of that in policing with charity events. So one of the great things about physical activity is you can often encourage people to get involved because they can raise money for other things if they can get sponsors to do certain things. There's a whole range of things we've interlocked physical activity with to raise money for a particular cause. And it might not be much, but it's something, and it gives people a motivation to get involved. I guess it's the third level that I want to talk about this morning, a little bit more than the other two, and that's how physical activity and safety in the community actually interlock with each other. And policing is very much about making communities feel safe. That's what we do, and police have a very significant role in making communities feel safe and maintaining community wellness. There's a lot of material around about how communities think about physical activity, and we were talking, you know, at the beginning here about walking in the community, about kids walking to school, about a whole range of things. But it interlocks with a whole range of other things that the community actually think about as part of their normal life cycle. In 2007, the Premier's Council for Active Living in New South Wales released a report entitled Physical Activity for Building Stronger Communities. And the report actually pointed out that there's a very strong correlation between the perception of neighbourhood crime and safety and participation in physical activity. And some of that participation is that integrated participation that I was talking about. And it found that adults particularly are more likely to engage in physical activity when they perceive that their neighbourhoods are safe. If they don't perceive their neighbourhoods are safe, they won't. And that, there's no rocket science in that. You think about it, it makes perfect sense. But very importantly, that also has an impact for the physical activities of children, because parents are less likely to let their kids cycle to school or walk to school if the streets are busy, they have a lot of traffic, if there are no pedestrian crossings and there are no lights and it's difficult to get across lanes of traffic. They're also less likely to allow their kids to walk to school independently if they perceive their neighbourhood to be unsafe, although it's really not clear what motivates or generates people's perception of unsafeness. My feeling is that a lot of it is generated by the media focusing on a single aspect. It's a little bit like, I suppose, the shark issue currently. You know, really, people are worried about it because the media have highlighted the issue. But if you look at the statistics of getting killed by a shark, they're minuscule. It doesn't stop people going swimming in the ocean. If you go down to Cottesloe today or any of the beaches, you'll find lots of people there swimming because they're not put off by that. The Australian Institute of Criminology have done a lot of work around that too. They've particularly looked at the impact that physical activity has on Aboriginal people and Aboriginal kids. And this is a really important thing for me because last year I made quite a public noise or debate, raised a debate about the fact that 50% of property crime in Western Australia is actually committed by young people under 18 or under I should say. And of these, 62% are Aboriginal offenders, so they're kids. So they're very young, some of them as young as 8 or 9, and that's a shocking overrepresentation in the justice system of one single particular group of people. And there's strong evidence to support that when you're able to co-opt or coerce or encourage Aboriginal children to engage in sport and sporting carnivals, that the rate of crime that they commit actually decreases. And there's some research around that. It's really important that they want to be involved, but somehow people have got to actually create the structure to get them involved. And one of the things I've been saying is we need to have all sorts of structures to get these kids involved in different things. We've been talking at the Department of Indigenous Affairs about wilderness or trail camps for Aboriginal kids, and particularly Aboriginal kids who've been involved in the justice system. So taking them on, it's about connecting them with their culture, but it's also about physical activity because there's a lot of walking and hiking involved. The programs where they've been run have been enormously successful in preventing kids from re-entering the justice system. it's probably a lot about physical activity. It's also a lot about having the right leadership while you're going through that physical activity process. But like a lot of these things in government, and a lot of people here work for government, they're subject to program funding, and program funding comes and goes. You know, it's there 1 minute, it's gone the next, and people move on. And we're never really able to do any very good longitudinal studies of the impact of these physical activity programs on kids. There's been quite a bit of work done around looking at Aboriginal delinquency and how that connects to sporting activity. So I think it's something we could think about as a group. Where we've actually run programs for offenders who are non-Aboriginal, there was one run some years ago in Canning, and it was around swimming pools, so they got the offenders to work in the swimming pool area, to work as cleaners of the pool. If they performed well, they actually got paid for their physical activity. Most of them stayed involved, and then they ran scuba diving programs for them as well. And where they were involved in these sorts of programs, police at least reported that while they were engaged in the program, even though it wasn't constant all day long, they were not involved in any criminal activity. So there are, you know, a couple of examples of the things that we can do. But I guess if I go back, one of the things that stops the average, you know, Joe Blow from allowing their kids to get around the streets and do things and walk is really their perception of what happens out there. And not only that, in Victoria they did a survey of people who were just in the community, who are not necessarily parents, and asked them what they thought about primary school age children walking around the streets to school or home, or just being around the streets doing what they do. And of that, 63% said that primary school kids should never be out on the streets unsupervised. So that's a real problem for us when parents, one, are saying we don't want them to go because we're worried about all sorts of things, but the broader community have now formed the view that they don't want primary school kids out there unsupervised either. I've made a lot of noise about that in terms of primary school kids being on the streets late at night. That's fine, but during the day it doesn't make a lot of sense. The survey also found that 43% of parents with children under the age of 18 believe that there's a high risk that they would be abducted by a stranger. It's an absurd conclusion because the risk of abduction in this country of a child is very, very tiny. In fact, it's not changed one jot since the 1970s. It's not as if today it's more unsafe for kids to walk on the streets than it was 30 years ago. It's just that our perception has changed. And we have to ask about what's driving those sorts of perceptions. 62% of parents believe there was too much traffic on the road. That's fair enough. And a survey found that many people believe that children should not be allowed to walk outside unsupervised until they're between 11 and 12 years old. So there's a whole range of things that people in this room will have to think about if we're going to encourage kids to get more involved in physical activity. I want to spend a little bit of time referring to an article that appeared in the Sydney Morning Herald last year. It was just before school started in 2011. It was written by a guy called Ben Rossiter, and it has some really good messages for all of us. He says, "My oldest child starts school on Monday. He will walk or ride the 1 kilometre distance every day of the year, rain, hail or shine. Initially he will travel with a parent or other local children and their families. When he is older and more confident, he will travel by himself and with friends. He will learn to negotiate the neighbourhood traffic and strangers. Importantly, he will get to play, find interesting things, kick a stone along the street, learn tricks on his bike, socialise and much more. People walking for leisure, pleasure or purpose are a marker of a healthy community." I think that's a really important point. I'll say it again. People walking for leisure, pleasure or purpose are a marker of a healthy community. Neighbourhoods where people walk to local destinations, shops, work or school with a dog, by themselves or with others, indicate a healthy, happy community. And as communities, we should encourage our children, where appropriate, where age appropriate, to walk without an adult as part of their development. If children are able to walk without adults, we are building their capacity for resilience, we're building their capacity for independence, and if our streets are not child or senior friendly, our community as a whole is failing. It's not just the police who are failing, it's the people who design suburbs, it's the people who have children, it's the people who design traffic. There's a whole range of things that are going wrong. So we need to encourage children's footsteps and laughter on our streets, whether this be through walking to school, around the neighbourhood or playing. And given the climate of fear around abduction and child molestation, this is really no small task. Since the 1970s, there's been a massive decline in the number of kids who walk to school. I've said that before. People walking to work or people walking generally. And the decline is extremely significant. You've heard some statistics. Only 37% of Australian adults do enough exercise for it to benefit their health. Research indicates that 61% of adults are overweight or obese, as are 25% of all children aged 5 to 17. And the total cost of obesity to the Australian community is a little bit short of $40 billion a year. I never know how they come up with that total, because they'll say similar things about smoking and alcohol and a whole range of things. But I think one of the points that Rossiter points out is that we're not allowing our children to develop life skills because we're not allowing them to go out and do what previous generations did, whether that was playing alone in the park, playing cricket in a cul-de-sac. Nobody wants kids to do that anymore, riding their push bikes, just doing things that normal kids do in a public open area. And ultimately, it's all physical. All this physical activity interlocks. And I'll just sort of conclude by just talking about a thing that happened to me the other night. I was out walking the greyhound the other night, and I stopped to talk to a grandfather who was coming along the street trailing his 3 grandsons. The youngest was about 5, the oldest was probably about 12, and the other one was in the middle. And they were interested in Molly. Molly's the greyhound, and learned a lot of things in that interaction that they didn't know. They learned, for instance, that greyhounds are gentle, affectionate, loyal and very lazy creatures, and are nothing like their on-track persona at all. They learned that greyhounds rarely sit down because their haunches are too big. They have to lie down most of the time. And they learned that greyhounds very rarely bark, but more often sing if they want something. Importantly, what they learned is that everything is okay with their world. That walk brings them into contact with their world and shows them that there's much to discover and there's much to learn and there's much to know when they're interacting with their environment. And that, of course, is as it should be. They didn't know me, they didn't really know who I was, but we were just interacting and talking as neighbours walking up and down the street doing different things. Let's return to where we started then, talking about music, because after all, playing in a rock band is very physical, particularly if you're the singer and you've got to sort of, move around and do some sort of interesting things. In 1985, Dire Straits released the album Brothers in Arms, and there's a great song about physical activity in it called Walk of Life. And the last lines of the song say it all. And after all the violence and double talk, there's just a song in all the trouble and the strife. You do the walk of life, yeah, you do the walk of life. Thank you.
Living agenda. The 2 key outcomes that we have in the framework are fairly simple. One's about creating active places, and the other is about active people. So we really just wanted to focus on each of those outcomes, and so we've asked our 2 speakers today, both Charles and Allan, to come and just talk to you in the context of each of those outcomes. So the first presenter I'm introducing is Charles Johnson. Charles has a background in urban geography and town planning with 30 years experience working at local and state government levels. He has held executive planning and development positions with the City of Subiaco and the City of Wanneroo. From 2000 to 2008, Charles was the CEO of the City of Wanneroo. From July 2008 to July 2010, Charles was an executive director at the Department of Planning and had a leading role in the preparation of Directions 2031 and beyond, and the review of the Metropolitan Activity Centres policy. In July 2010, he established himself as a consultant in his business planning context, which he has a policy, research and governance focus. Charles is currently a board member of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority and is presiding member of the Central Metropolitan Development Assessment Panel. He's president of the WA Division of Planning Institute of Australia and is also actively involved with the Committee for Perth and Centre for Built Environment and Health at UWA. And from our perspective, Charles is also the chair of the Task Force Built Environment Advisory Committee. Planning and urban design play a vital role in ensuring our communities are designed to support active living. So it's fitting that Charles is here today, and I think based on what I've just talked about, it's not a question of what you do, Charles, it's what don't you do now. So I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing from Charles, so please make him welcome.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks for that. I thought I would start with just recapping a couple of things about the evidence base for what we're talking about. I think that's very important as a planner to understand the sort of case for what we're doing and the changes we make in our communities. I want to also talk about the contribution of planning and urban design, not always positive, and you'll hear some of that this morning. Active places in the greenfields in our outer suburban areas, and Joe alluded to the fact of the rate of growth of metropolitan Perth. The fact is that by 2050 or thereabouts we're going to have about 3.5 million people in Perth, and that's a very much faster growth rate than I was working on when we were drafting Directions 2031. So how do we manage that growth? Active places in urban infill. I've been a champion for some time about urban consolidation and infill. What about the issues of active places there? The principles of designing successful active places, and then the connections to active living for all. So just to wrap that up. Oops. I might just use that. No, that's going to have to... next. Yeah, I'll just use that. This is a bit of a slide that I'm a bit too familiar with, unfortunately. But in terms of the issues that you've already heard for this morning about the obesity and the overweight issues and the role of physical activity, so I won't dwell on that. The evidence for design and built environments and their impacts on our health, both positive and negative, is there. There are a number of publications about that, looking at how our environments, our built environments, can encourage walking and active transport where they are done well. And the issues about low density cities and the evidence about mixed use and the opportunities to go to a variety of places. This has recently been published. I'd encourage you to try and get a hold of it through the Health Foundation. Increasing density in Australian cities, maximising the health benefits and minimising the harm. So there's evidence about the fact that if we increase our densities, increase mixed use in neighbourhoods, the opportunities for people to walk to places, then that can be beneficial. There are some issues with where we locate high density housing and the issues of who's occupying them and how we manage that. But that's an interesting piece of research you might want to have a look at. This is important in terms of public open space and the issues of the health benefits, and there's quite a bit of literature about the importance of public open space. This is a book that I read and listened to the author, Richard Lowe, about The Last Child in the Wilderness, or The Last Child in the Woods. The Americans, it's an American book, and they have to name something so they call it nature deficit disorder. And we know there's a strong relationship to health and access to public open space and nature. So you have a lot of things like nature play and evidence and interest in that area. Very much the diagram, which you can't really read on the left, is looking at the connections between open space, walking, mental health, reduction of stress, some of the things the Commissioner was talking about this morning, and he also mentioned his greyhound. This is my dog. She's more of a hound than a greyhound, but she takes me walking every morning and afternoon. So I'm a great supporter of having a dog, not the cattle or the mouse, they don't walk, but the dog does. So that's very important, and it's very important for socialisation. And there's a lot of good evidence about that connection and the socialisation of people that use that. I want to talk to the planning section start with this quote from one of our best sort of planners. He's actually a geographer, Professor Gordon Sennin. He's wrote this amazing book back in the 70s called A Sense of Place, and this is fundamental to our interaction and understanding of place. And he says, a sense of place is basic to civilization. All great cities of the world have been places that we intensely and minutely loved. And we think about our places in Perth that we love and love to visit. And we know a lot of those. We actually did this, we had a visitor from Project for Public Places came to visit the committee for Perth a few years back now. And he worked with us and had a theory that each city had to have 10 great places that you wanted to visit. And so we mapped out ours for our Perth, and those are great places. A lot of them we unfortunately tend to drive to. So I'm interested in places of local places and spaces that we can walk to and be active in and enjoy being at. The coffee shop in the middle is Bruja, and often seen Allan Tranter in that place. So if you're looking for Allan, you want to follow it up, this is where he's often found. Streets, places, parks, enjoyable places that we want to go to. We want to think about those places. But what about placemaking? What we have created as a planning industry is a sense of process, not place. What we're very good at is creating regulatory environments, not actually livable environments. And a lot of ours, and we get it from the language we use, we talk about in planning, we talk about housing rather than neighbourhoods, we talk about single density rather than varied densities, sameness and instead of, you know, the things that we do in terms of our design and the way we think about planning is process. And we talk to a lot of the regulatory people, a lot of the planners at local and state government level, and you would swear that the process is far more important than the actual outcomes. And I find that very frustrating from time to time. We have this document called Livable Neighbourhoods, which I actually think needs a well and truly have a review of it. It's been around since about 1997. It's our principal document for designing neighbourhoods. Has a lot of good elements in it, but I think it is really an opportunity to review that. And I know through the Built Environment Committee that we are looking to get involved in that review, because this has had a very strong impact on the design, and we've suddenly gone from a lot of conventional designs, as we call it, with the cul-de-sacs to interconnected street systems, and this is the one at Brighton, and planning for those communities. And we've built a lot of pocket parks around those neighbourhoods, and we really need to understand how they work. A lot of the developer formula is to build small cottage lots around those in the greenfields areas and to market those as small parks. But we also need to think about the active spaces. They can have a role if they're places to walk to, but thinking about the quality and the size and the usability of space. And I also think in terms of you know, the same thing with planning, how we've developed and codified things to the way we've codified play equipment and codified parks, so that they become very much the same thing. We're scared stiff, and I was when I was in local government, about being sued by someone. So we standardise everything. We make it so that it could be anywhere. What we need is more creativity in design and more willingness to challenge conventional design. And most importantly, as I'm sure Allan will be talking about, it's the people, the involvement of people and ownership and loving of space that makes a sense of place so important, and our involvement in creating and working with communities and looking and care for our places. What happens if we get it wrong? This is one of my favourite snapshots of what happens when we get it wrong, which is, of course, the cultural centre. I'd always worried that we had to call something a cultural centre. I thought culture was all around us, but we have a cultural centre. And we've now, and I'm on the board of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority, and the former EPRA has spent now millions of dollars trying to fix this problem. Because poorly planned spaces can have very significant effects on people's willingness and ability to use those spaces. And in the planning industry, I wish we'd spend more time going back and actually looking at the places we've created and asking those questions about how well they are being used and how well people love them or don't love them. Because we need to understand that and implement those things much more in our design. Our policies, of course, and we love policies. The West Australian Planning Commission has 140 policies, last time I looked. The policy on the provision of open space, for example, the 10%, well, why 10%? It came from originally the Stevenson-Hepburn report, and it has its history before that. We know that the demands of uses of public open space are changing. The demands on what those spaces do in terms of both being for drainage, for conservation purposes, for active recreation, we need to understand and much more about that. And there's a common perception amongst planners, particularly the new urbanists, that active space is on the decline. We need more passive space, if you like, and that supports their support for pocket parks over active spaces. So there is a bit of a debate, and people like Gary Middle at Curtin are taking up that challenge about the importance and the lack of provision of active open space in many greenfields areas. And we need those regional facilities, and a lot of them aren't being provided. The state has, in the Perth context, the WAPC has Metropolitan Improvement Tax, which it uses to purchase public land. Much of that land has gone to bush forever, which I don't say isn't important, but we're not putting in regionally significant facilities where we can have active spaces. We're trying very much strategically to try and work with schools and shared use and to try and build opportunities for senior fields to do active places through agreements and arrangements. And we should not see open space as a secondary consideration. Many planners that I've worked with over the years, we used to call it, basically slops, which is the space left over after planning, and you put your recreation facilities on that. So we need to think about those things. We need to have a strategic public open space or strategies, public space strategies, active strategies, which should be as important in a local government as the housing strategy or the retail centre strategy. We should be asking these questions, and we should be at the table debating those issues very importantly, because I can say a lot of the planning profession thinks that public open space is certainly less sort of important, and is basically an issue about marketing of master plan communities. And let's think about the quality, obviously, not just the quantity. More focus on usable space. Sustainability is a huge issue now with water. The ability to, I've been involved in the Armidale Redevelopment Authority and the Wollongong Urban Project, literally struggling to put any water onto the parks at all. The versatility on multi-use, and I think also in these two slides show the inequity that can exist between much of the new communities and many of the established areas, particularly in the outer suburbs. One of the things we've observed over the years is the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots in our society in terms of access to facilities and services. So that's another issue you might want to talk about when we get to do that. Urban infill and the provision of open space, and as density increases, can we Can we increase the amount of public open space? That's a very difficult question when I'm talking to places like Subiaco, which has already identified that it's underprovided, and its parks like Rosalie are very stressed by for public access for active activities. And we should also get public open space and space provision as an important factor in this design, and when we have this debate about Directions 2031 and the infill, we should be also talking about and understanding public open space access and how we can provide that. And of course, what happened to our backyards? What we're seeing, of course, in our society is the shrinking of lot sizes for a lot of good reasons in terms of efficiency and sustainability. We're now down to lot sizes. When I first came to Perth, we were talking the traditional 1012 square metre lots, the quarter-acre block. Now, when I was doing planning at Wanneroo, the average size was about to 550, 600. Now the average size is getting down to around 400, 350s, and there's a lot of smaller cottage lots being produced. At the same time, we have this trend, which I think is actually changing, of very large housing. So people have been in this consumer society of building houses. Back in the 1970s, the average size of a house was about 75 or 80 square metres. Now it's around 250. That's the size, the footprint of a house. So you're getting much larger houses on much smaller blocks. So what about public open space in that sense? And how are we going to provide those quality places which keep people active and are the places that people walk to and enjoy? And community gardens, for example, is a great way, I think, of engaging the community, and I'm certainly a great supporter of that. But there's a lot of issues around how we use space. If you're looking at sort of the models of what people might look to in terms of how to do good design of space, the Project for Public Spaces out of America has produced some pretty good stuff, and on the importance of design and connectivity. They describe their core elements as being accessible, that the places must be accessible to the community, where the people are engaged in activities, a range of activities, so that these spaces are used and loved by people. They must be comfortable environments to be in, and they must be sociable where people meet. And there's a whole lot of work, and if you go to their website you can see a number of case studies and examples on that. We've been involved from the Planning Institute with the Heart Foundation and the Australian local government, I think it is, in terms of this work with healthy spaces and places, design principles behind that. The things that we talk about is really about the similar things that the Project for Public Places are talking about: access to facilities, encourage formal and informal participation in physical activity, managing traffic volume, creating welcome footpaths, creating connected street systems, designing and locating schools, importantly. And we talked earlier, the Commissioner was talking about the importance of access and walking to schools, designing inclusive public open space with community safety in mind. So there's a lot of material there if you want to look up on healthy spaces and places. Very important in the work that we do is this notion of engagement or consultation with the people, the community, with the people in the sports industry, those that know about these things, often overlooked by planners. We always seem to know best. But allowing the people who use and have responsibility for a place to have a say in how that place is designed is central. We need to recognise that others have a knowledge and involvement and an interest. We need to establish those partnerships between the community and the planners and the developers about doing those things. And consultation is a two-way process. It's not about just presenting the plan and then defending it anymore. And you have to keep communicating. It's not just a case of one-off communication. So how we engage with the community on planning for our communities is very important to us. Healthy, active by design, and you will have seen at the back of the room a short interim draft guide to this document that's been a project of the Physical Activity Task Force and the Heart Foundation and the government in terms of progressing some of the designs on the ideas about creating active places forward, moving that agenda on. And I won't go through all the principles, but they're very much relevant to the design of public places, how we plan compact developments with access to local services, again, planning, design, connected communities, and how we provide those environments for safe and multifunctional with a variety of public spaces and places, all those good things that planners and others in the industry talk about. This is an interim document, and there's there is a phase 2 preparation of a main document, and I think they're going to be tendering, or there will be an appointment of consultancy to do that fairly shortly. So I recommend this to you to have a look at. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the connection, which is to make the point that, as Joe was making, that this thing isn't in isolation. And talking about active places, it really is connected to active people. It's connected to the whole notion of how we are going to deliver and why we are doing this, as I've started with. What's the importance of doing this work? And in this strategy, which is a very comprehensive one, it looks at how we are going to influence the decision makers, who's going to be involved, how are we going to move the agenda forward, both through raising awareness, getting better policy in place and moving that agenda on. And finally, I just want to thank you this morning to give me an opportunity to talk to you. Happy active living, if you like. For me, my active living is long distance walking. That's what I do. But I'm very pleased to answer any questions, or if you want to raise comments, we've got a few minutes to do that, I think, Joe. So has anyone got a point? Anyone violently disagree? All those planners out there? Wasn't too rough on you, were it? No. Yes, sure.
I'd just like to add one in. You had a slide up there about life and death of the Australian backyard. Could also be one about the life and death of the Australian schoolyard.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're, at the moment, we've just committed, well, the Physical Activity Task Force is working with the Education Department and Walga and others to develop a shared use of those open school grounds. Clearly they are under a great deal of pressure, and particularly in areas which are rapidly growing, and the issues that Joe talked about. Yes, it is correct that they do have 2 hours of exercise a week. What we have to do is create the opportunities to use those places in the after hours situation to get community groups, sports groups into them. I'm a great champion. You know, I spent a lot of time arguing between whether we could get a junior oval or a senior oval with a primary school, and how do we do that? How do we share facilities between local governments? Both parties being squeezed, of course, by space. People wanting to do things more and more compact. So it is a point. That whole issue, I think, of access and the loading up of school sites is an issue.
Now, here's our next one, Allan Tranter. Alan, some of you have probably heard Alan before, and it's always a pleasure to hear Alan speak. Alan's the Managing Director of Creating Communities Australia, the company he founded in 1992. His vast expertise in social planning and his flair for the marketing of ideas have contributed to bottom line improvements for some of Australia's leading businesses. A former director at the West Australian Department of Sport and Recreation, he has also assisted local and state governments in strategically aligning community projects. Alan is that unusual combination of pragmatist and visionary. His approach is focused on competitive advantage to deliver mutual benefit, commercial value for clients and quality of life for communities. Alan's vibrant personality and lively sense of humour, I'll let you judge by the end of this, makes him such a sought-after speaker while also complementing analytical and diagnostic abilities when dealing with the critical change management issues of his clients. His down-to-earth, hands-on approach to strategy, leadership and solutions is effective and renowned. Alan's been a member of a wide range of boards and advisory boards, including those of the Urban Development Institute of Australia, West Australian Technology Precinct, Bark and Gecko Theatre Company, Recovery Inn, State Athletics Association, and is currently a board member for Nature Play WA. So without further ado, please welcome Alan.
Can you let me know when I've got 5 minutes left?
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm going to make it hard for you. I'm sorry. I reckon that it's possible for you guys to read in the document all their policies and things. So my gig today is going to be to try and shake your mind around a bit and provide a couple of frameworks in which to think about people and communities. Because in my view, people and communities is one of the most complex concepts that we have to deal with, and yet we often put it right at the end, like today. No. We often negate its importance and put almost no resources into it. So what I want to do today is let you read stuff and try and provide a little framework for which you should, in which you should think about the future. That little dude up there is my youngest grandson, and his name's Isaiah. We were out playing, we had a day together just after Christmas with his older brother, and apart from all sorts of interesting things, at the end of the day we were playing in our backyard, and he said, "Granddad, I need to do wheeze." And I said, "You can just do it underneath the lemon tree, Isaiah." And he was taking a little piddle, and I said, "Don't forget to give it a shake." And he said, "Granddad, it's far too big to shake." So I'm not sure, I think his Uncle Brock might have been the teacher of that, but I haven't been able to confirm it. What's the outcome of this stuff? Is the outcome physical activity? Is it active living? Or is it creating fantastic people who are healthy and vibrant and are tackling life in a manner which is really exceptional and building amazing communities? Because if your outcome is physical activity, that's pretty dull and boring. But if it's a means to creating something that's sensational, you've got a much better chance of winning your arguments. And to me, that's the important thing to think about. What is the outcome? And too often we think about what are the inputs rather than what is the outcome. I was in Newman on Monday with, we're a valued partner of BHP. And we were at a workshop with another valued partner of BHP, which basically means they control you by holding onto your short and curlies. And they were going through the program, and I won't mention the other body, going through the program with all their deliverables, all their metrics, all their evidence base, all of their whatever you want to call it, and they were all inputs. They were going, we're going to do 6 newsletters, we're going to be doing the, and they were getting all the ticks. And the BHP people were going, and I'd been set up, I didn't know at the time, and I went, what's happened as a result of all these inputs? And they went, oh, we're not quite sure. Be very careful when you're talking about evidence base that you're talking about stuff that leads to an outcome, not tick the boxes of inputs. And we get trapped in ticking the box of the inputs, and if I swear, do they cut it out? Yeah. And stuff up people and community. But we've done all the right things. We're working in Jigalong at the moment. 120 agencies are funded to work in Jigalong. Jigalong's 2 hours east of Newman in the middle, not in the middle, but in the desert. Government departments get ticks for achieving their metrics by going out there 6 times a year. They drive out, they get there at 10:30 in the morning and they leave at 2 in the afternoon. They don't actually see anybody, they don't deliver anything, but they have their metrics ticked. And their evidence-based, because they've used a bottom-up approach, is correct. But if you go and look at the school stuff, the health stuff, the child abuse, and every other thing which is an impact of community, they're disgusting. And yet everybody's being praised. So think about the outcome. Think about what you're trying to achieve in the space in which you're working. And it's about people and it's about community. And Charles and I often shadow box because he's bigger than me and I'm a coward. Even though I did write the professional boxing legislation in Western Australia and supervise fights for 10 years, that's because I'm a very good practicing coward. Because if you hang around with tough people, people assume that you're tough and you can be ruthless. But what Charles talks about is extraordinarily important. He talks about neighbourhood. And neighbourhood is a spatial construct, and it's the space in which things happen. Community is a social construct, and it's about people collaborating to get stuff done. When you read the word community in a document, just think, are they talking about people doing stuff together and collaborating to achieve outcomes, or are they talking about things? And if they're talking about things, they're not talking about community. It's important, but it's not community. So go back to your organisations, have a look at your sustainability checklists, everything under social, which is about things and transport, just chuck it out and see what's left. Some of them will be very vacant. So here's a formula to think about in relation to the way to deal with all the stuff which these guys have put together over a number of years. Here's a formula for you. Understand your outcome. Okay, understand your outcome. And we now know, and we all agree, that it's about sensational people and really great functioning communities. There are 3 other understands. Understand people, understand context, and understand trends. Right? So that means you've got to know a lot of stuff about the space that you're working in. And then be more exciting than the options that people have got. Or be more relevant or appropriate than the options that people have got. And often I'll be working with a group and they'll be going, oh, we don't understand why young people just don't seem to engage with us. And I go, because you're fucking boring. The option of doing anything is better than the option of doing what a lot of people provide. So you've got to be more exciting than the options that people have in their life if you want to engage them in stuff. And the things that Joe and Karl spoke about this morning were really great examples of what that means in people's lives. So let's just think a little bit about context. It was interesting that we got some of the context today about Western Australia. My wife's on the International Board of World Vision, and she keeps reminding me of the fact that in the 30 minutes in which I'm going to be up here this morning, 6 women will die in childbirth needlessly in the world. And 240 children will die of starvation and curable diseases in the world. So that's broad context. What's Western Australia's context? Go to Mirrabooka and the kids that have been brought in from all over Africa and lumped together because all Africans are the same. And yet they were killing each other in tribal warfare where they came from. See what it's like to run a swimming pool in that context. Or be involved in recreation, or be involved in trying to get those families engaged in stuff, versus going to Scott College in the western suburbs. Different context. If you've got a prescription by which you do people and community and do active living, you will definitely fail, because the context in which you work are dramatically different. And just think about 12-year-old kids and their life experiences. Think about a 25-year-old, which might be easier for a lot of you, and the life experiences that they had, and think of someone who's in their 60th year and the life experiences that they've had, and say that they are exactly the same, because they're totally different. The context of your community is going to be totally different, even just by the age groups of the people that are in it. So have a good look at that, because if you've got one program which you're delivering uniformly, you're going to miss most of the people that you're trying to hit. So think about context of that community. We were doing Broome North recently, which is doubling the size of the population of Broome. We do a lot of community engagement. We don't like the word consultation because often you've got to take people through a learning process about what the potentials are, because often in consultation you end up with the lowest common denominator because people just explain to you their life, what they understand in life, so then you have to keep going through all the things which are statistically relevant, and you end up with the dumbest idea in the room that everyone agrees to. So engaging people and taking them on a journey is far more important. We're working in Broome North, and we had a community reference group. They said, for crying out loud, don't let the architects from Perth design our homes. Because they come up here, they go, isn't it hot? We will need air conditioning. We'll do a 4x2 out of bricks with no veranda. And yet we, after the second year you live there, the first year it's hot, and I've lived 2 years in Derby and 3 in Karratha. In the second year, winter is cold. We wear a jumper when it's 25 degrees, and we actually live outdoors 9 months of the year or longer. We actually have our windows open. If we've got air conditioning on inside, we only turn it on for 6 to 8 or 12 weeks of the year. So don't design out our lifestyle. Think of context. And they said, and when you're designing our streets, don't just think of a grid pattern. Think about where our breezes blow. So how places are cooled down. So if you put the little boxes next to each other on a perfect grid so that when you look at it from the heavens, it looks like a perfect new living, what do they call it, Charles? Livable neighbourhoods thing, absolutely perfect, but the breezes are stopped. So one of the guys doing some of the work up there in the planning put in 8 or 10 meteorological stations through the site and found out where the patterns of the breezes blew through the whole year, and designed the roads and the houses on offsets on blocks so people can live outdoors. What do you think that does for active living? An amazing change by just thinking about the context. Think about the context. What about trends? Trends are really, really interesting, and in each community trends will be different. Can I just go back to context for a tick? Sorry. I can talk for hours, and I'm just going to try and give you a couple of things in which you can pin some stuff on in the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. In Jigalong, every now and then a mining company flies in 3 or 4 sports stars, and they have a festival, and they think that's great for the people in the community, and it is. People come from all over. The Māori people come from all over the north of the state and play in their different town groups against each other. Sensational for a lot of different reasons. Impact on active living, on physical activity, not great, because sport doesn't happen for the rest of the year because there isn't a governance process for it to keep going. But there's a group called KJ, and it's an Aboriginal term which is far too long for me to ever remember, and they care for country. They've got 60 18 to 35-year-old men just from Jigalong in a town of 240 people doing care for country, and that is hard work. That's going out, finding the water holes, digging them out, setting up camps, hunting their food, living that lifestyle. So often, again, we take our context of what our understanding of the sport is or physical activity, take it and drop it in a place, and it's totally irrelevant. One of the hardest gigs on the coast at the moment in the north of Western Australia is doing turtle counts. Because you've got to walk 6 kilometres in the morning, 6 kilometres in the evening through sand. So, when we're doing the physical activity plan for Broome, the actual work in the environment was providing just as much physical activity as the sporting groups in the town were. So think context, think about the difference. Newman, Headland, Karratha and Broome are totally different. You can't do the same stuff in each place. Let's talk about trends for a tick. FIFO was mentioned, fly in, fly out. We've just done some of the biggest research projects in the world on fly in, fly out. And can I tell you, most of the stuff you see in the media is urban myth. It's not based on any evidence whatsoever. Or it's based on one university student's PhD thesis where they went in to see whether or not families are stressed by FIFO. The answer is yes, they are. Is family breakdown more in FIFO families than in residential families? No, they're not. Are the stresses on the family different? Yes, they are. are the way to actually interface with that different? Yes, they are. But don't just, when you read stuff in the newspaper, think about where that information came from, because most of the stuff about FIFO is wrong. What do you reckon is, not able to answer this question, average age of a FIFO worker in Western Australia? So what do you reckon it is? You can yell. 30. 43. 43. What did you guys say? 45. Oh, you were way too old. Fail. But most people think they're someone in their mid to late 20s. And most of them think they are cashed up bogans who own a ute and a jet ski and a motorbike and have a little tail that goes down the thing, and they drink a lot and swear a lot and go to Karl's concerts or your concerts from now on. But the reality is most FIFO workers, and it's about 80% male, 20% female, most FIFO workers are actually highly skilled. Live in a community and commute for reasons. And often the reasons are because they've got kids who are teenagers or in their 20s who need university or great education. So they're making a work choice based on family lifestyle. But the implication of that trend is significant. The work that we've been doing in retention of FIFO workers means the better they're connected to their host community, the longer they'll stay. The better their communication with their family, so Skype and stuff, the longer they'll stay. In a source community where people come from, and by the way, there are some suburbs of Perth where 25% of the employment is FIFO, so 25% fly out. What do you think that does for the local structure of P&C groups, sporting clubs, support groups for mums, because I'm 80-20. So what we're doing with some local governments is going, how can you use your facilities to deal with the trend of FIFO families in your space? And they're going, never thought about it. And so there are some people starting to go, boy, we could do, and immediately the opportunities become immense. And so look at the trends, not just in the activities that people are doing, but in the life that they're living. It's such an important thing to think about. And life stage is a really interesting thing to think about as well. Now, when I was in my 20s, the normal practice was to have your kids in your 20s, so that by the time you got into your 40s, they were sort of almost off your hands, and so that by the time you got to 50, you were free to live the rest of your life. I was working, which is fantastic. I've got grandsons now who sort of, but apart from that, I was working with a private school recently, and the K to 7s, although they're just changing that now, aren't they, with middle schools? I can never keep up with the movement. We're going, one of our big problems is that our parents are in their 40s and 50s. And often it's their second lot, or it's, that's the father, and I said I could offend everybody, it's the older guy with the trophy bride. Although my wife is much younger than me, and she reckons she married an old person so that when I retire, she can. And she was just disappointed that she thought I was 10 years older than I actually was, because she thought then she could retire much earlier. But they were going, we've got people in their 40s and early 50s with 8 and 10 and 12-year-old kids who are demanding that we teach in a certain way and run our schools in a certain way. Where 30, 40 years ago, we were all bright-eyed young people trying to survive having children, and we thought teachers were gods and goddesses. And so the life stage that we're doing things in has a huge impact on the way that we do life, and therefore on the way that we live life. And so that it means in your community you need to understand those types of things. Now let's just talk about people for a tick. How am I going with time?
Yep.
10? Sorry, 10 minutes to go, you've got to suffer for another 10. What do you think the 3 biggest health risks are in our society according to epidemiologists and sociologists? Heart? Here they are. Loneliness. Lack of control of the present. Fear of the future. Biggest 3 health risks in our society. And from that, people don't go outside because they're scared, and they drink or they take drugs or they do stuff because of those stresses on their life. So in our community, and guess where our family structures are going? No, they're shrinking. And because of our migration, our transitory way of living, the fact that we're the most nomadic that we've ever been in society, our family networks are breaking down. And so that we're often living in a place where we don't know anyone around us and we've got no support structure. So what do? We stay indoors. What do? We engage with people on, what's that called? Yeah, all of those things. Which I can do but don't get yet. I like to look at someone in the eyes and watch their body language and know when they're nodding off or when they're using their texting when I'm speaking. All those sorts of things. So we have to realise that there are people who struggle with the basic way of interacting in life. And that can be the biggest inhibitor to people living active lifestyles. So connecting people becomes an extremely important thing. Having them be engaged in their environment is such an important thing. Now, Charlie was talking about engaging people in parks. You can engage people if you take the time in every single part of things that occur in community. So we're involved in one project down in the southern part of the metro area where the landscape architects have designed these amazing parks and put the public art in. I said, isn't that public art? And they went, yeah, isn't it beautiful? And I said, if you'd gone through a process of identifying local artists, getting a bunch of people together and saying, what's the theme, what's the character, what's the spirit we want to capture here? Sorry. Where was it? Yeah. And then putting out a competition for people to draw sketches of what that might mean. Artists, bring it back to the space where you want it to be. Invite the neighbours and people in to have a look at it. Vote on it. Then then fund 5 maquettes which people go away and prepare and bring back. And you get everybody back in again. And then you might fund 1 or 2. Imagine what sort of public art that is. The connection that people have to that art and to that place. And you've brought people together 5 or 6 times on doing something that a professional could have done in 10 minutes. That's the challenge. The challenge is to engage people in 1,000 different ways each day rather than just doing it yourself. And it's harder and it takes longer because people are complex and people are sick to death of being consulted with no understanding of the outcome of when they've been consulted. What we're doing in Karratha at the moment is a new suburb and the town centre. And I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce up there 3 weeks ago and they said, we hate our local government because they come and consult with us and then we never know what happens. Land cores are waste because they've just made these 7-storey buildings go double road wide when we wanted a single road and have cafes around it. But they said, no, it's too hot up here, no one will go outside. Well, we want outdoor cafes. And they're going, and our mining companies don't engage with us. They just treat it as though we are units of production. Imagine how easy it is to engage in that community. It's a challenge. But already by doing 2 or 3 quite simple things, people are starting to come out of the woodwork and going, hang on, if you're doing that, if you're talking about what our parks should be like, I'll come and play. I'll be in that space with you. Think about how you can engage people in everything that you do in a way which is safe for them. In a way which is safe for them. Public meetings are a disaster. They're just the platform for baby politicians. Or in Fremantle, and we're doing a lot of work in Freo at the moment, they're the place where these really old rickety people come out who've been involved in every social movement in Western Australia for the last 70 or 80 or longer years. They have their say and they, on their Zimmer frames, go away. We're doing the consultation at the moment around King Square in the middle of Freo. Someone forgot to invite young people. So there were a lot of 70 and 80-year-old people, and one woman was really adamant that it should be a quiet place for old people to go to read books, which means that they should keep young people away from that. If you don't do your engagement with community properly and provide safe spaces for young people to have their say, you'll be designing safe places for old people to go and read books in the middle of town centres and wonder why it is dead. One of my designers, I've got 3 designers who work in our comms team, was beaten up last night in Fremantle on the way home from a restaurant. Nobody on the streets. He's not bad. 5 minutes to go. So in the last couple of minutes, I just want to get you to think through, what's your community like? How is it structured? What's its context? What are the trends that are happening in your place? What are the people like? How can you connect with them where they are and do stuff which is more exciting than the options of sitting at home or doing their hair or whatever it is they choose? How can you get... I'm on the board of Nature Play, as you heard. Apart from the outside barriers of every institution in the world so far saying that young people, the children should not be allowed outdoors because they might break an arm or they might do this or they might... There is actually a groundswell of people going, that's fantastic, my kids have been so richly blessed by being taken outdoors and let do what they want. And schools are putting in broken down, fallen down trees for kids to play on. And kids are coming alive through that. What can you do with each of those age groups that you've got, each of the ethnic groups you've got, which will actually engage them in a manner which is really exciting? And the last thing I want to talk about is this notion of place. Charles is dead right. The notion of sense of place is really important. And it's a great example of where all the people with different views of life can come together and make a contribution. Because we think there are 4 layers of place. And the first layer is the physical realm. So what are you going to make it look like? How nice is it going to be? What's going to be there? The second phase of it is a managed space. And that's a swimming pool or a shopping centre where there's often one owner who can actually provide management for that space. One of the challenges that we've got is a lot of our spaces now are multi-owned. And so coming up with a governance structure which provides that overall management role is an interesting challenge. But that's by the way. So physical realm, managed space, activated space, festivals, stuff like that. How can we do carols by candlelight or movie nights or have jazz there to bring people to that space so it's activated? And where you get sense of place is where you go somewhere where you know you are safe. You may well be recognised by name and called by name. You might bump into somebody else that you know and have some social interaction. And you feel comfortable about spending time there, reading, working, whatever you want to do. You know, it's got hi-fi in it if you want to do whatever you do these days with that sort of stuff. Or just a space. Well, I love Bruja, and I do go there every day because it's got 3 different physical areas. It's got an outside area, it's got a little area at the front, and quite a big area at the back. And if I'm mulling over an issue, I can take my workbooks there, sit at the back, have a couple of coffees and not feel like I'm bankrupting the place. And it's the third place, and a sense of, and the other sad thing is whenever I go there now, someone wants to talk to me. So I'm trying to find somewhere else because I actually hate people. Not true. But so that there is the challenge in what you're creating to look at the physical realm, but look at its governance and look at about creating the places that people can be drawn into where they feel at home. But don't forget, the majority of people have lost the art of being part of a community. So part of our role is to help people interact in a safe one-on-one to begin with and gradually expand that out so they can actually play a very active role in the way that their spaces and communities or their neighbourhoods become communities. So don't forget this is about outcome. What are we trying to create? We're trying to create people who are hardy, who can cope with change because change is always going to be around. We are focusing on communities which are vibrant. I haven't even spoken about the sociology of community. But if you want to understand community, get to understand the sociology of community. And then it's about understanding people, context and trends, and then offering something which is more exciting than the options. And too often what we offer is a lecture. You must do this and you can't do that. And that's all we offer. And we've got to be able to drag people into a realm which is exciting, which is safe, which is relevant to them.